In today's episode, we're going to interview Matthew Hammond, one of our community members, Inner Circle members. And if you have ever been in a position where you just felt like you're out of control, you felt like you didn't have a plan to get ahead or even understand what passive income and financial freedom even looks like, you're going to get a huge takeaway from today's episode. Now, a couple key takeaways. Number one, always be investing in yourself. Number two, don't forget to include your spouse. Don't move without them. And number three, always listen to your friends. Unless you're Russ. And Russ, you have a story about that?
Yeah, there are times where friends can lead you astray. I'll tell you one quick thing. This interview, the guest Matthew shares about buying a rental property in the Smoky Mountains. Joey, I don't know if I ever told you a story, but me and four other couples went to Gatlinburg during Y2K, right? So right before.
I remember that, yeah.
You know, we partied like it was 1999. And one of the couples I didn't know very well, they said they'd gone several years, you know, and that this was a place they knew. And so they got this 5-bedroom cabin. We all stayed in it, a lot of fun. And they said, hey, you know, about 11 o'clock, let's travel over to Cherokee. Cherokee has a casino. And we're like, oh, that sounds fun. You know, they give us something extra to do. So about 7 of us pile into my Ford Explorer. That was not a 7-seater, by the way.
I was about to say.
It was not a 7-seater. So we had a couple people in the very back, and we're traveling over there. And a few of these people had been drinking a lot, and they also smoked cigarettes. And I didn't let anybody smoke in my car. So we're driving these like back roads, Joey, on the way to Cherokee. And I don't know how far it is from Gatlinburg to Cherokee, North Carolina. I'm going to say probably straight shot 30 to 40 minutes. It took us about an hour and 45 to get there because every 10 to 15 minutes, I'm having to stop so they can smoke a cigarette on the side of the road and pee. And so I'm like, we're going to get pulled over and go to jail. No doubt. We finally get there. And I think the alcohol, the liquid encouragement that most of them had is starting to wind down.
Yep.
And they walk into the casino with this excitement of, okay, now I'm going to get to refresh my alcohol and I'm going to get to gamble, right? Just all the sins that one can do, smoking cigarettes, gambling, and drinking all at the same time. That's where we are. And we walk in the place and you see the waitress and somebody's like, yeah, I'll take a Jack and Coke or 7 and 7. And the waitress is like, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. We don't serve alcohol here.
What?
And everybody's like, exactly. What? What do you mean? You are a casino, right? You what?
It's like second behind gambling.
Exactly. Like I thought that was the necessary requirement to gamble was alcohol. And she's like, yeah, we're a dry county. We don't serve alcohol. I'm like, oh my goodness. I'm like, all right, well, show me where the craps tables are. And they're like, yeah, about that.
No craps tables?
No table games at all. It was a fully digital casino. Coin casino
in 99.
Yeah,
digital.
It was brutal. So
wow,
I did find a craps table. It was a digital arcade game.
You know that thing is rigged.
Come on now. You know they're gonna let 1 out of 14 people win on that thing. So we're there about a total of 40 minutes. I put $50 in this machine. I actually was doing pretty well. You know, the machine was letting me do pretty well. It wasn't like I was doing well. I won like $220. So I go to cash out so we all could leave, get back into the car, and make the 2.5 hour trip back to the condo or to the chalet or whatever. And the thing broke it. It won't spit out the 220 because I've literally capped how much money it can spit out. So I have to flag down the waitress with the orange juice and say, hey, can you, get a manager or somebody over here who can pay us the money? And so this guy's coming over and he's got this confused look on his face and he's trying to figure out how to get the money. It's like, hey, I tell you what, I have to get somebody else to come help me with this. Why don't I treat you guys to a meal?
Oh, you're thinking jackpot.
Well, typically casinos, one of the games is to keep you there, right?
Yeah,
because
sure.
if they can keep you there, they can keep you spending money. So a lot of times they'll give you, I don't know if you've ever been to Las Vegas, Joey, or anything, but they'll give you these buffet tickets. You go upstairs and there's lobster, there's crabs, there's prime rib. This thing is typically you're like, oh yeah, we're getting ready to eat. And so he's like, let me walk you over here. And he pulls us up to the front counter of a delicatessen. like one that you would see like in a Winn-Dixie, like a shopping,
like a
center.
Subway.
Not even that fancy. And so like you had to pick out your sub. That was this was the meal that they were treating us to. It was like a hard baguette bread with like some salami and mayonnaise and pickles on it, right? So we're like, there we are, like chewing our dinner. And so the guy finally gives me the money. We get in the car. Now, the only beauty of this is now at this point, we get in the car and everybody goes to sleep, except me, of course. And I'm sitting up there in the front seat, like driving this just drunken stupor group, back home. The beauty was I could get there in 30 minutes as compared to the hour and a half it took us to get there the first part. The end of the story, though, doesn't end there. We get back and get everybody in the house. Everything's fine. 3-4 weeks later, Joy, I'm riding down the road. I'm like, man, my car smells.
That's not uncommon.
Yeah. Well, no, it wasn't common. I used to keep my stuff clean.
Whoa.
And so I go to the little car wash and I'm like cleaning underneath the seat. What do I find underneath the back seat but one of those Subway sandwiches?
Oh, the gift that keeps giving.
Yeah, salami is still giving it to me. So here's the thing, is that if you ever want to listen to a friend, check out what they're giving you first, because I would have never, ever got in the car with that group of people and driven and wasted 4 hours of my life to ultimately end up with a smelly sandwich in my car 3 weeks later.
Man. Well, that's not the experience that Matthew Hammond had. His cabin up in Pigeon Forge is doing amazing things, and it is getting him the course to financial freedom. So without further ado, that has nothing to do with Matthew Hammond. Let's jump into this interview with him.
Welcome to the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast, your guide to understanding how to get out of the Wall Street rat race and start your own mailbox money lifestyle. Now, don't let these handsome Southern draws fool you. These financial minds are teaching our country to enhance savings, increase cash flow, and create passive income, all without the help of Wall Street. Are you ready to break through? Now here are your hosts, Russ Morgan and Joey Murray.
There's always a moment here when we're trying to evaluate what's going on in our life and comparing it to others. And today's conversation, you're going to get to listen in as we talk with Matthew Hammond, and we go through his journey into how COVID, the whole kind of shutdown of the economy, impacted your life, Matthew, but also the opportunity that came from that. So I would love to just kind of get a little background for those who haven't had a chance to spend time with you in the inner circle. You are in sales and you're in a world that was impacted. Talk a little bit about that. Give us some background to what was going on in your life middle of 2020 last year.
Yeah. So I'm in sales. As you say, I was actually in manufacturing sales, to be more specific. And a lot of the markets that we sold into were affected dramatically by the COVID virus, or COVID-19, I should say. And as a result, of course, the products that we sold to those customers, basically just went in the dumpster. And so, of course, my paycheck was affected as a result because, my primary paycheck is based on commission. So COVID definitely affected me and my wife. My wife is also in sales. So we were both affected somewhat equally as a result. And
so when you say you were impacted, were you saying that the companies that you guys sold to were not open any longer, and so you couldn't go sell to them, or the products you guys were selling was no longer needed because they weren't being used? What does that look like?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the companies, because obviously everything pretty much shut down around the country when the coronavirus was at its peak, and a lot of the companies that we sell to, whether it be breweries or restaurants or even retail stores to a certain degree, a lot of these companies shut down or were limited on how many people that could come in and actually utilize their services and products. And so as a result, obviously their sales plummeted and of course didn't need our products as much because of it. So it wasn't anybody's fault per se. I mean, it literally was just affected by the virus from a sales standpoint.
So when all of that's happening, obviously up to this point, talk a little bit about what you had been doing financially. Like, what mindset were you in? What were the things that you guys were doing to kind of insulate yourself, if you will, or prepare for something in the future?
Well, prior, we both made good livings in our W-2 jobs. But despite having decent paychecks to live off of, we were still technically living paycheck to paycheck. So when the coronavirus hit, and of course it affected our paychecks, that's when my eyes were really open, and I said, look, I talked to my wife, and I said, I don't know what we're going to do, but we got to do something to where we are not slaves to our paychecks, to where if this ever happens again or it gets worse, we'll have the opportunity to come out of it ahead, as opposed to struggling to catch up with everything. And so that's really was the starting point of our real estate and actually the IBC journey. That's really what kind of springboarded it.
Well, let me ask you, before we get into the IBC side and the real estate side, what would you have said, and maybe you can't even define it because a lot of people can't, but how would you say you and your wife were thinking about the idea of financial freedom or retirement? Like, what would you say your mindset was about that side of things when you were just kind of living paycheck to paycheck up to that point?
Well, I really didn't have a concept. I mean, I knew what financial freedom was as a general concept, but I really didn't have a concrete idea of what financial freedom really was. We go to our jobs Monday through Friday. We get a couple of days off on the weekends, get a few weeks off in the year to go on vacation, and that was basically our life. Mm-hmm. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I love the people I work for and everything, but there's still limitations having a W-2 job, even if you love the company you work for. And so that financial freedom, as I understand it now, obviously a lot more concretely, we definitely did not have it. And I still don't technically have it now, but at least I'm on the journey to getting to that point, fortunately.
You said now you have it concretely. Explain to the person listening to you what that means. What is it from your point of view now that you know that you didn't really know before that?
Well, so using our son as an example, he has baseball games that he plays in, or he's in chorus, so he sings in concerts and everything. And again, our companies were very flexible with that respect. We could always go and ask to say, look, my son's got a baseball game today. I was wondering if I could leave an hour early so that I could make it. And of course, they were always amenable to that. But it still didn't change the fact that I had to ask. So I would rather be to a point where, if my son's doing something, I don't have to go to anybody and ask permission. I want to be able to say, yeah, absolutely, I'll be there.
Well, define how do you get there? I think for the person who maybe listened to this podcast episode, never listened to another episode, maybe like, okay, but how do you get there?
They're like, yeah, I want that too, but how does that happen?
What do you think is, or what do you know is the way to get there?
Well, the key that as I understand it and as I've come to understand it is that, rather than working for your money, you need to have your money working for you. And my wife and I, up to this point, have been working for our money. And which is great. We're very fortunate to have our jobs. We didn't lose our jobs during the pandemic, so we were very blessed compared to a lot of other people. So, I feel for anybody who was hurt even more than we were during that time, and still is. But the facts still remain that we were working for our money and we were not having our money work for us. And I just feel like when we can actually put our dollars to work for us, then really the sky's the limit as far as compounding that income. Yeah. And when that income's coming in passively, where you don't have to go to a job for 8 hours to get that paycheck, you can actually make money while you're at the baseball game, or you can make money while you're at the chorus concert. That right there is what financial freedom is to me.
So that means getting cash flow coming in that's alternative to your active income. You use the word passive. And I love that when we have assets that produce income streams that we don't go to work for, it can work for us, right? Now,
Exactly.
before all of this happened, where was your money residing? Where were you putting money before you came to this realization?
Basically checking and savings account. My paycheck would go into my checking account, and of course we'd pay all our bills. And then if anything was left over at the end of the month, it would go into a savings account, and it would just sit there until we were running behind on bills and needed to pull it out, or if we wanted to buy something and didn't have the funds in the checking account. But basically it was just sitting there dead in the savings account.
So you guys weren't doing any of the traditional 401ks, IRA, stuff like that?
Well, I'm sorry. Yes, we were. We do have the traditional retirement accounts. We had IRAs. We do have 401ks as well. So it was going in there as well. But of course, it's funny you say that, because the 401ks and the IRAs did not come to mind when you asked the question, because as far as I'm concerned, that money doesn't exist because I can't touch it.
Man, that Wall Street has done such an amazing job when they've convinced us that the money that we worked so hard to get and put in there doesn't exist. I love the way you said that.
Like magic.
I think that they would be clapping right now as they heard you say that. Yes, it's worked.
Right, exactly.
Well, you used a key word in there. You said was going in there. What does that mean?
Well, when the CARES Act was passed, I looked. I was reading up on, like, all of my reading went from just entertainment literature to nothing but investing literature. Every book I was picking up had some sort of investing, whether it be real estate or anything that I could do or that I could come up with to generate passive income. And the one key factor that all of these books really included was the need for capital to start.
Yeah.
Because you really can't get started. You can't make any money without money. So that was the influence for using that CARES Act to go into our IRAs and pulling money out of our IRAs so that we could have that startup capital, so that we could actually get started investing and hopefully building up that passive income portfolio.
Now, how was that with you and your wife? Were you the one kind of taking the lead, saying, okay, we got to get some passive income? I don't know where we're going to go, but I'm going to start reading. Or was she also reading at the same time? Like, who was doing what during that time?
So I was doing all the reading and coming up with the ideas. And then when I came up with the idea of pulling money out of our retirement funds, I went to my wife, and I'd kind of hinted at it a little bit here and there. But when I finally said, look, this is what we're going to do, I just need to convince her. So I went to her and I said, hey, I got a great idea. I know we've been talking about, getting into some investing. We're not 100% sure on what we're going to do yet, but I do know that we're going to need money to do it. So with this CARES Act, we have the opportunity to pull money out of our retirement funds without that 10% penalty. And we can even spread out the taxes over 3 years. So, if there was ever a time to do it, it's right now. And so that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pull out the maximum amount out of your IRA so that we can have something to start with. And she just stared at me for a minute, and then and then once I finally picked her up off the floor, I explained a little more in detail what the plan was, and from that point on, she said, "Look, everything you say makes sense. Let's go for it. If not now, when?"
I just read this comment. It was so drawing joy. I wanted to share it. I realized that my time is not really mine. It's my company's. Now I have to stop negotiating my time for money, and I need to start working to become financially free.
That's exactly how I felt when my daughter Adler asked me on the way to school, Dad, can you pick me up from school today? And I had to say, no, baby, I have to go to work. That's where I drew the line.
In order for you to be clear on the things you need to do and stop doing, and to know who you need to become so that you can stop trading time for money, join us right now at wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/passport.
Now let's get back to this episode.
Well, so I want to kind of recap what I've heard here, Joey. So he had kind of said, hey, look, verbalizing what so many of us have experienced in life and maybe still going through, living paycheck to paycheck, living activity to activity, right?
Yep.
Never really able to see a little past our nose, if you will, of what lies before us, but also having this undergirding, this challenge of when I want to do something, I'm not able to go. And evaluating your position so well, you said, here's a place. Our money is not necessarily in our control because we've been putting it away and have almost forgotten about it. The way out of this strategy is I've got to create income streams that would equal or exceed our current monthly expenses, maybe even equal or exceed our current active incomes. And the avenue is freeing our dollars from these IRA plans. And now, man, the government has actually given us a window, right? Like they've actually given us a real opportunity here to take advantage of it. So when you think about like getting dollars back into your control, in steps a friend. And somebody, there's always somebody in our life that, whether it's a mentor or a buddy, that will share an idea with us that can make a difference. Talk about a little bit about that interaction that you had with a friend I think you guys maybe were on a trip or something like that, of maybe where were those dollars? Where could they go? How could you get those dollars into your control? What did that look like?
So we took advantage of the CARES Act and of course got that money out and put it in our savings account, and then it sat there until we could figure out what we wanted to do with it.
Yeah.
And it was earning that awesome 0.01% interest while it was sitting there. So it was making big bucks while we were waiting.
Right.
And a friend of mine, Brent from church, actually we got to talking, and he was kind of in the same boat as I was, as far as trying to come up with some ideas to try to get into more passive income opportunities. And he actually, we're just talking. He said, you know what, there's this podcast I've been listening to, Wealth Without Wall Street, and they have an interesting concept, and it's called infinite banking. And what you ought to do is you ought to listen to a couple episodes. And there's actually a book, Becoming Your Own Banker. I've already read it. Brent said, I've already read it, so you're welcome to borrow it. And so I said, yeah, that's no problem. He said, I've never been much of a reader. I'll read it here and there, but if it doesn't grab my attention in the first chapter, I'm putting it down and never picking it back up.
Right.
But Brent knew that, but he said, the book's only like 80 something pages. So surely you should be able to get through that at least. I said, yeah, let me grab it. I'm going to the lake with my son and wife, in a couple of weeks. So I'll read it at the lake if I don't have anything better to do. And, so we get to the lake, and I picked up the book because I was just sitting on the couch. We had already come back from being out on the boat, and I was tired, and so I just wanted to relax. So I saw the book sitting there, so I picked it up and opened it up and started reading it. And literally by page 2, like I was completely hooked. Like I could not put it down. I literally blew through that book in probably a total read time of maybe an hour and a half or so while I was on that lake trip. I mean, I just could not put it down. I was excited about everything that the author, obviously Nelson Nash, him, was saying in this book. And what was even funnier is I was trying to relay that excitement to my wife and son, who obviously were not reading the book. And they just looked at me like I was an idiot, because I'm trying to relay this excitement and trying to explain what I'm reading. And even though it made sense in my mind, I could not convey it to them to where it would make sense to them. It would just click for me, and I was like, this is the way to go. This is what we got to do to hold our money for these opportunities. I mean, this is the perfect system. And every time I told my wife, like, this is the perfect system, this is what we got to do, she's like, well, I mean, if you like it, then yeah, we'll look into it. But like, I just could not convey that excitement to her like I really wanted to.
So what did you do? How long did you just move without her, or did ultimately you guys do something to help her understand so that way she was as excited about it as you were?
Yeah. So I'm the head of my household in name only, so I'm not doing anything without her.
Good. I just wondered, I've heard that there are guys like that. I just knew Joey and I were part of that
wisdom that he just
she likes
write
to,
that down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my wife, I love her to death, and occasionally she lets me believe that I have the power in the household, but we all know the truth. So so that being said, no, I did not immediately jump into it without her. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to get her on board with the same level of excitement that I did, because I don't want to have to be dragging her across the finish line every time that we're doing something new. So I wanted her to have that excitement as well, so that we're both running across the finish line together. And so, of course, I was listening to more and more of your podcast episodes regarding the IBC. And then, of course, I joined the community. And I saw that y'all had a lot of training programs on there. So I looked at the IBC 101 program, and I said, this is it. This is what we need to do. These are videos. I don't have to hand her a book. I don't have to get her. I mean, she would be willing to read it, but it'd be on her time. And I didn't want to wait a couple of years for her to get up the motivation to read it. I wanted to start as soon as possible. So I said, this is what we'll do. We'll watch the IBC 101 training together. And hopefully that will at least generate that excitement that I'm feeling about it in her. So that's what we did. And for the next couple nights, we sat down and I casted it on our TV, and we watched it in the living room, and we watched each individual video. And of course I was watching the video, but I was also looking over at her, just trying to get some sort of reaction from her. And she's very stoic when she watches things. I mean, so it was hard to get a read on her.
She was giving you nothing.
She's giving me nothing. She's a phenomenal poker player, by the way. So I couldn't really get a read on her. But we get to the last video, and the video, I'm sure it was the two sisters. It was the case study with the two sisters who were actually buying a car, and one of the sisters was using a CD, and the other sister was using the IBC policy, and it basically just laid out all the numbers on where the sisters were at the end of paying off those cars, as far as like how much money they had left, how much money they had generated from each of those processes. And so that video ended, and she looked to me and she goes, still stoic, still had her poker face on, but she just looks to me and goes, they really should have led with that video. And right then I was like, yes, I got her.
So at that point she saw it in action, and that video, it does a good job of helping. By the way, it's so interesting that you said that we should have led with that video, because I've told this story several times on the podcast. That was what hooked me too. Like, I was at a seminar. I had heard the concept of infinite banking. I'd also heard that they use dividend paying whole life insurance. And I thought, yeah, that's not for me. And then when an opportunity finally hit me, kind of like you were put in a position where I needed to start looking for ideas, market crash. Then I sat in and watched an hour presentation. And that presentation consisted of basically that exact example: how two people could buy cars using two completely separate systems, do the same exact thing, and one end up with a lot more capital, a lot more money, a lot more opportunity. And it was like, oh, wow, we need to do that. So I love the fact that you're sharing that. And if you're listening and you would love to be able to watch that same video, you actually can join our inner circle. And we have a 7-day free trial. And as a member of that, you can get access to that course for free. Normally that course is $197, but as a member of the Inner Circle, you can get access to it for free. When you join the Inner Circle, you'll get a 15-minute call with one of our coaches, and they can actually give you that link to that. So I appreciate you sharing that, Matthew, because that's huge. Let's move a little faster now, because I do want to get to the financial freedom part of this, right? Because ultimately, that's just storing cash. And we got to get our cash in a place that we can control. We got to, I believe, get it out of accounts that we can't touch for 60 years. That's not in line with our purpose, what we're wanting to have for our family. Sitting in checking accounts is not a good idea. It's dead. That money is taking a nap. It doesn't earn much, as you already mentioned. And even worse, when we spend it, it no longer can earn anything. So using infinite banking can get the best of both worlds, get a fair return on our cash, but even more important, allow that cash to keep growing regardless of what we do. So now you said you're researching, you're doing, reading everything you can consume. You got this money, you set it up into a cash value account. You've set up your first system. Where does the passive income come into this story?
So, so as I said earlier, I listened to a lot of I will say that your podcast actually was the first podcast that I actually listened to religiously.
Oh, nice.
I listen to other podcasts here and there, just if I have time or whatever, but yours, I actually look forward to every episode because I know that it's going to have some sort of nugget of information that's going to help me in this journey that we're talking about. So that being said, so I was listening to some other episodes, and another episode came on from your podcast with Avery Carl, interview with Avery Carl on short-term rentals, and specifically short-term rentals in the Smoky Mountains. And it's funny, Brent and I, actually my friend Brent, we talked about it, and we both heard that. He actually told me about the episode, and I said, well, let me skip ahead and see if I can find this episode because I want to hear about it. And we got to talking about it, and we said, man, this is the way to go right here, I think, because I mean, just the cash flow from a short-term rental just blows away long-term rental cash flows. I mean, now long-term rental is great in the long run, if you have a good portfolio, but short-term rentals in the short run, I mean, just kill it on cash flow from what we've heard and read. And so that, I mean, we were immediately motivated. I set up a call with Avery, and she gave me the rundown of how it works. And of course, my wife was on that call this time, so I didn't have to relay that information to her this time, fortunately. So we were both on board immediately, and so that's when we started looking for our first short-term rental property, and we ended up purchasing a cabin up in the Smoky Mountains. We actually closed on it back in October, and it's doing better than we could ever have imagined. I mean,
talk about what that looks like. I mean, most people have never, bought a place and put it up for rent like that. Talk about that process and what does it look like? How do you interact with it as an owner? And obviously, do you guys then go ever to it as well to use it personally?
So we closed on the nice thing about these, especially in that market, the nice thing about these are they're turnkey. So, when you purchase it, there may be like one or two things to do to maybe put your personal touch on it, but for all intents and purposes, it's ready to rent from day one. Mm. And so that was a big thing for me because, the cabin was about 3.5 hours from our house.
Yeah.
So obviously we don't have the opportunity to drive up there every day to get it ready for renting.
Right.
So the turnkey aspect of it was a big selling point for us. So we closed on the cabin, and the nice thing about the short-term shop, which is Avery's company up there, it's basically an all-inclusive service. I mean, they help you buy the cabin, they help you with the training, they train you on how to run your own short-term rentals. So you don't have to hire a property manager, you can do it yourself, you can self-manage, and that way you're maximizing your return on the investment because you don't have to pay that percentage to the property managers. And they give you all the tools you need. They have training that actually they train you on the tools that you need to self-manage, whether it be the property management software that you use, the pricing software that you use. And of course they train you on, Airbnb and VRBO, the two major platforms. And so it's all, I mean, it really truly is turnkey. And we were really excited about that. And so I've been self-managing it since day one. And, I spend maybe 30 minutes a week on just general stuff. We'll go up there occasionally. My wife would like to go up there more than I. I love the mountains, don't get me wrong, but my number one priority is I want it to be rented. I want to be making money from it. So if we're planning on going up on for a weekend and then somebody comes in with a last minute rental, I'm like, oh well, I'd rather have the money.
Right, exactly.
So we do take advantage of it when there's time, but honestly, fortunately, with the occupancy rates up there, especially during the pandemic, because that market was really strong for short-term rentals during the pandemic because, well, obviously travel in general was restricted in a lot of ways, but this type of market you can actually drive to for one. They're single family homes. The cabins are all separate from each other. So you can drive up there and you can be isolated from people. I mean, there's still tourist attractions, obviously, that attract people there, but if you want to just go up there and just get away from everybody else, you can go up there and spend a week in a cabin, rent it, and not have to worry about being around other people if that's your goal for your vacation. So it really was ideal for our, the situation with the pandemic too.
You talked about occupancy, and obviously the higher the occupancy, the more cash flow that leads to. A lot of people who are listening to this podcast may have bought a rental property in the past, more the traditional method, right? They put someone in there for a year, 2 years, 3 years. And in most of those properties, they get a mortgage on it and their cash flow tends to be between $200 to $500 a month is what they would experience per property. How has your experience been in the short-term rental world in that market?
Man, in that market, our net cash flow after expenses each month can range anywhere from really in the slow months, which really there are no slow months, but even in the slow months, you're still cash flowing about $2,000 to $3,000. And
wow.
in the strong months, in the prime season months, summer and wintertime, you can cash flow $6,000 to $10,000 a month. Depending on what kind of property you have, of course. I mean, it's all dependent on the property, but
yeah, man,
that is amazing.
And I know that obviously the market there is a little bit harder to get into, right? You mentioned that. I mean, have you guys been looking at expanding up there?
Yes, we're shopping around for cabins right now. We've actually chosen several different markets that we're looking into. We're actually looking in Tennessee. We're looking in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Georgia, and we're actually also looking in the Gulf Shores because that's a strong short-term rental market as well. So we're shopping in several different markets and just looking for that next opportunity.
So tell us, I mean, this is awesome to hear your whole journey up to this point. What do you feel like is a reasonable time frame that you guys will be financially free, where you can put the stamp on there and say, man, I don't have to go and ask anybody for this permission to do what I want to do?
If my plan comes to fruition, I would expect if I'm able to scale the short-term rentals like I'm hoping to, I would hope to be financially free by definition, within the next 5 years or so.
Man,
that is so awesome.
How cool is that? I mean, isn't that an awesome thing? And if you're not watching this, Matthew is not 55. He's not 65. So when he says I'll be financially free in 5 years, where most people, they would say, oh, well, yeah, I mean, my parents retired when they were 72, that makes sense. But when you're thinking about it in light of, no, like I'm young, I've got children in the house, and I could potentially have the ability, if I want to, right? You guys may decide that you want to keep doing your day jobs, and that's awesome. That's the want to part and not the have to part, which makes that conversation completely different. And I think it also allows you to work better for your job. I think when we're bogged down with the have to, we feel the burden of that. Sometimes we're not as productive in our work. But when we go because we're passionate about it, man, we're truly able to serve at a higher level. I love the fact that you have that goal and you can see the light. You feel that you could be there in 5 years. So I totally think that that's an opportunity for all of us to take into account that there is a path. You've laid it out. You got to get your money in your control. Once you've decided what you want, that's the clarity piece. Get it in control, and then pick the course that you're going to take to get there. And Matthew, thank you for sharing that. I love the way you were able to not only educate yourself, but also be able to influence and educate your family. And I think that that's going to have long-term impacts, especially as your son, because he's sitting there watching you right now. He's watching what you guys are doing, and his story will be different because of what you've learned over the last year.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see his interest. He's 15 years old now, and he actually is asking to go with me to real estate investor meetups.
Oh, cool.
So he's actually been to several meetups, and he's kind of, I mean, he's a sponge right now. So I mean, he's just soaking in all the knowledge, and of course I'm still learning too. So I'm by no means an expert on anything. So so we're learning together. So I'm really excited to see where that takes him.
Well, I'm going to end with this one last question, and then we'll wrap up. But so talk about how it feels today on this whole journey compared to pre-COVID. Your family, you personally, you and your wife, your marriage, like what are some of the things you would say are the differences in the way you feel today versus then?
Just my overall outlook on life in general is so much more positive. You know, I had a really good life pre-COVID. Don't get me wrong. But now, you know, I still have a really good life, but I also have the ability to make an even better life for me and my family. And that outlook is just, it's just that positive outlook is just, it's just what fuels me.
Well, I hear a bunch of confidence. That's what, I mean, to me, there's so many people that are stuck before. I'm just using pre-COVID, right? They're stuck in that same boat. They don't have any aim or goal or whatever it may be. But now I hear somebody saying, man, I have a plan, and if all goes well, 5 years from now, like there is so much confidence in a statement like that. And I want that for people. Like that's why Russ and I do what we do is we had to learn with a bunch of bumps and bruises along the way. In fact, I had to pay for the book. He charged me $20 for the book.
I would have given it to you, Matthew. I would have made you buy it.
I mean, I'm grateful that Brent was a real friend and let you borrow his. But we had to learn the hard way so that we could lay out the path. And man, just hearing your story, it gets me so fired up. Like there's real impact happening when people take action and do this. So I'm really grateful for you being able to come on, and I'm hoping that so many people are being inspired by what you're saying.
Well, one last thing too, I would love for you to speak into this because, you know, we like to refer to the GPS. That's our direction. So many of us can't get in the car and drive to the coffee shop without putting something in GPS. But Joey and I think of GPS as having a goal, having a plan, but then also having the support to execute. So talk a little bit about the support piece and how important that is, like your experience within the inner circle, having a coach, one of our coaches, I know you've worked with Mark. Talk a little bit about that as we finish, because I don't want to take that for granted, because I believe that part is what is the missing ingredient sometimes in the world, is that sometimes we get goals, we get plans, but we don't have the support to get us that final mile. Would you mind speaking as we finish up, just as to your experience to that, as somebody who's listening going, should I be a part of this community? Should I be a part of this inner circle? Should I be having these calls with these coaches? How has that been for you?
Man, it's been phenomenal because, and this is 100% honest, I definitely would not be where I am right now without the support, not only from Wealth Without Wall Street, the podcast, but Mark's guidance on the IBC policies. My friend Brent, because I love the fact that he's kind of doing the same thing I'm doing, so that we're able to bounce ideas off of each other. And the inner circle, I mean, it is worth its weight in gold as far as I'm concerned, because I love the Thursday roundtables that we do, because I get so many ideas on how I could better utilize my policy, how I can be more efficient with my policy. I love the fact that you guys do that, and please don't ever stop doing that because I will be there every Thursday.
Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing, and we appreciate you as always for listening to this podcast. Hope you'll take action on this. I can't wait for the day that we get a chance to interview you and to hear your story, just as Matthew, you shared yours with us. So thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
This has been the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show to break free of the Wall Street mindset and begin building wealth on your own terms in places you understand so that your wealth will never run dry. See you next episode.